The hallway outside room 4 of the Federal Contracting Disputes Office smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. I counted the floor tiles because it was either that or look at my brother standing 20 feet away, wearing the same easy smile he'd been perfecting since we were kids, the one that said he already knew how this ended. He didn't look at me like someone about to be exposed. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was a problem he was being inconvenienced by solving. Our father stood beside him in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first month of office rent, chatting quietly with their attorney, nodding as though they were discussing a golf handicap instead of the company I had spent 6 years building from nothing. My mother sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall, hands folded in her lap, expressions soft and distant. The careful look she wore whenever she needed the room to believe she had nothing to do with what was happening. My attorney, Patricia O.C., stood at my shoulder. She didn't look at them at all. She was reading the last page of our exhibit binder for the 3rd time, her pen moving in small, precise circles over a note she'd already underlined twice. That steadiness was the only thing keeping me from walking across that hallway and saying something that would end up in a transcript I couldn't take back. I need to tell you what happened in that room. But before I do, I need you to understand what it cost to get there. Because it didn't start with a forged document or a federal dispute filing. It started 6 years earlier, in a dining room in Naperville, Illinois, with a proposal I printed on cardstock because I thought the weight of the paper might make them take me seriously. I was 26. I had just left a structural engineering firm where I'd spent 3 years doing work that kept getting credited to people above me. I had a business plan, a list of potential municipal contracts, and exactly one client who'd verbally committed to hiring me the moment I had a business entity. I had no capital. What I did have was a family that had built their money in commercial real estate development, a father who understood infrastructure, and what I believed, stupidly, genuinely, was a relationship worth asking. My father sat at the head of the table. My brother, who managed the family's development projects and never let anyone forget it, sat to his left, phone face up on the tablecloth. My mother brought out the good dishes for no reason, which I later understood was her way of softening a room she already knew the outcome of. I laid out my materials. I walked them through the market gap, aging municipal infrastructure, a shortage of small independent firms with the technical capacity to compete for federal rehabilitation contracts, a window that wouldn't stay open long. I had projections. I had letters of interest. I had a signed letter of intent from the city engineer of a suburb west of Chicago who was ready to move the moment I was licensed and incorporated. My father listened with the posture of a man being patient. When I finished, he looked at my brother. Not at me, at my brother. My brother leaned back, arms crossed, and said the capital exposure didn't justify the return timeline. He said it like he was reading from a whiteboard. He didn't look up from his phone while he said it. My father turned back to me and told me that municipal contracting was a relationship business and that I didn't have the relationships yet. He said I could come work on the development side, learn how deals actually moved, and revisit the idea in a few years when I had more seasoning. He said it like he was offering me something. He said it like the word seasoning was a gift. I gathered my materials, I thanked them for their time. I drove home and sat in my apartment for an hour without turning on the lights, and then I opened my laptop and started making calls. The first 2 years were the kind of grinding that doesn't make good stories. I incorporated with $3,000 in a personal account and a home office and a 1-bedroom apartment in Evanston. I subcontracted to larger firms for work that was technically beneath my licensure just to keep cash moving. I filed for every small business certification available. I drove to pre-bid meetings for contracts I wasn't ready to win yet because I needed my name in the room. I answered emails at midnight and invoiced on weekends, and once, when a city inspector flagged a structural calculation on a retaining wall project, I drove 2.5 hours at 6 in the morning to be on site when they arrived because I was not going to let a client's job stall on something I could fix in person. The first real contract, a pedestrian bridge assessment for a county in downstate Illinois, paid enough to hire one part-time draftsman and cover 6 months of software licensing. I remember depositing that check and standing at the ATM screen longer than I needed to. Not because I was surprised, but because I needed to see it in a number. Proof that the thing I'd said was possible actually was. By year 4, we had moved into a proper office space in Chicago's West Loop, a small team of 7, and a contract portfolio that had started attracting attention from larger municipal clients. We won a federally funded bridge rehabilitation project in Indiana, then another. then a contract for structural assessment and remediation planning on a network of aging overpasses in Ohio that was large enough that I had to bring on a senior project manager to handle the day-to-day coordination. His name was Marcus. He came highly recommended, knew federal contract management cold, and fit the team immediately. I did not tell my family any of this. It wasn't bitterness, exactly. Or maybe it was. But it wasn't only that. I knew what would happen if they saw success. I had watched my father absorb other people's work into the family orbit my entire life. Cousins who came on temporarily and never left. Business partners who found their equity quietly diluted over years of friendly dinners. A college friend of my brother's who had a promising logistics company until my father suggested a strategic alignment that left the friend with the title and no real ownership. The pattern was consistent. If you succeeded near them, they made your success theirs. The only way to keep what I was building was to keep it out of their field of vision until it was too large to quietly absorb. I was wrong about that. Or rather, I was wrong about how much distance was enough. I found out how they learned about the Ohio contract the same way I found out about everything. Too late and all at once. The notification came on a Thursday afternoon. A filing with the Federal Contracting Dispute Resolution Office, initiated by my brother, claiming that the structural engineering firm I had founded and operated for 6 years had been established using capital he had privately provided, and that a signed operating agreement between us entitled him to a controlling interest in the company and first right authority over any federal contracts awarded to it. I read it 3 times. Then I called Patricia. She answered before the second ring. I read her the filing number and she was quiet for a moment, then said, "Send me everything, don't respond to anything, don't call him." I drove to her office. I spread the documents on her conference table and stood there while she read them the way she read everything. Completely still. The kind of stillness that means someone is moving very fast inside. When she finished the first pass, she set down her pen and looked at me. "Is there any version of this that has any factual basis?" she asked. "Not accusatory. Clinical." "No," I said. "He never gave me money. There's no operating agreement. Show me your capitalization records." I showed her. $3,000 from a personal savings account. A small business loan from a community bank in year 2. Revenue reinvested quarterly. Clean books going back to day 1. Audited the previous year because the Ohio contract required it. Patricia pointed to the signature on the document my brother had filed. An operating agreement. Professionally formatted, with my name and his name, and what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. "Does this match your signature?" she asked. I looked at it carefully. The overall shape was close enough to fool someone who'd only seen my signature once, or seen it small, or seen it on a photocopy. But I noticed immediately what was wrong. The way I formed the letter N in my last name. There's a slight leftward lean that comes from a habit I developed in college and never broke. The signature on that document went straight up. Uniform pressure, no lean. It looked like someone had studied a sample of my handwriting and reproduced it carefully, which meant they were patient, and which meant they had access to a document I had signed. "It's not mine," I said. Patricia nodded like she'd already suspected this. "Then we prove it. Forensic handwriting analysis against verified samples. We pull the capitalization records to eliminate the premise entirely, and we find out where they got a sample of your signature." She paused. "Do you know who in your organization might have access to documents you signed?" I thought about Marcus. I didn't say his name yet. I just thought it, the way you think something before you're ready to say it out loud. The next morning, I went to Patricia's office and asked her to help me do something I had never done before. I needed to know whether someone inside my company was feeding information to my brother. The filing referenced internal project details that weren't public. The Ohio contract's phased timeline, the subcontractor coordination structure, specific line items from our project management system. These were not things my brother could have found in a press release or a public award announcement. Someone had to have given them to him. Patricia agreed immediately. She'd handled enough of these to know the shape of it. "We need to find the channel," she said, without tipping off the channel. We constructed a document, a memorandum marked confidential and internal, drafted to look like a contingency measure being considered in response to the federal filing, a potential asset relocation to a facility in Raleigh, North Carolina, to protect against any court-ordered operational freeze. We specified a subcontractor name, a logistics timeline, a storage arrangement. None of it was real. There was no facility in Raleigh. We had no subcontractor there, no relationship, no reason to have one. I called a meeting with 6 people: Marcus, my lead structural engineer, the federal contracts coordinator, the financial controller, the operations manager, and the compliance officer. I told them the filing was a hostile action by a family member and that we were taking precautionary steps. I walked them through the memorandum. I watched their faces the way Patricia had told me to, not looking for guilt, just looking for information. Marcus read it twice. He was good. His expression stayed neutral. But when I mentioned the Raleigh facility specifically, something moved in his jaw. Subtle. The kind of movement that isn't a reaction to the information, it's a reaction to recognizing information. Like he'd heard a word that had been used in a different conversation and was now suddenly hearing it again from the wrong direction. I didn't look at him any longer than I looked at anyone else. I closed the meeting. I told them the memorandum didn't leave the room. 2 days later, my brother's attorney filed an emergency motion. It referenced the Raleigh facility, not vaguely, specifically, the subcontractor name, the timeline. The language was almost word for word from a document that had existed in paper form in a single conference room and nowhere else. I called Patricia at 5:47 in the morning. She already knew. She had already drafted the response. We had him. The dispute hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in October, which meant the week before was the kind of slow-motion dread that makes every normal task feel like something you're doing underwater. I reviewed documents. I answered client calls and kept my voice level. I went to the office and walked through the floor and smiled at people the way you smile when you're carrying something heavy and you've decided the kindest thing you can do is not let them see it. On Friday, my brother called me. I let it go to voicemail. On Saturday, my mother called. I answered because not answering felt like the kind of thing I'd regret regardless of how it turned out. She told me that this had gone far enough. She told me that I was hurt in the family. She told me, in the careful tone she reserved for subjects she had already decided she was on the right side of, that my brother had only wanted to be included, that he had only ever wanted to be part of what I had built, and that if I had just brought them in earlier, none of this would have been necessary. I held the phone. I listened to her lay the logic of a trap over the top of the trap itself and call it a reasonable conversation. "Mom," I said, "he filed a federal fraud claim using a forged document." She said that was a strong word for a family misunderstanding. I said I had to go. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up. Not with anger. I was past the sharp edge of it by then. More with something that felt like finally having a clear answer to a question I'd been trying not to ask for years. How far would they go? Now I knew. The morning of the hearing, I wore a dark suit and arrived 11 minutes early. Patricia was already in the hallway, 2 exhibit binders on the bench beside her, annotated with colored tabs the way she annotated everything, visually clean, internally precise. She looked at me and said, "Ready." Not as a question. My brother and father arrived a few minutes later with their attorney, a man named Garrett Cole, who had a reputation for being technically excellent and personally unpleasant. He gave Patricia a nod that managed to be dismissive and professionally appropriate at the same time. She didn't respond to it. My brother looked at me across the hallway. He had the expression of a man who expected to be walking out of a room he intended to own. My father stood with his hands in his pockets, the posture of authority, the posture he had worn in that dining room in Naperville 6 years ago, when he'd explained to me that I didn't have the relationships yet. We went in. The contracting disputes officer was a woman named Linda Suarez, and within about 4 minutes, it was clear that she had read every page of both filings and had no patience for theater. She let Garrett Cole make his opening presentation. He described a private family arrangement, a silent capital investment, a verbal operating agreement later formalized in writing. He described me as the technical talent in a partnership I'd chosen to operate as if the other partner didn't exist. He used words like informal and documented and then later implied these somehow made the arrangement more genuine rather than less. Linda Suarez made 2 notes while he talked. Just 2. I watched her hand and counted. Then Patricia stood. She established the capitalization record first, $3,000, a personal savings account, a community bank loan in year 2. Line by line, documented, audited. She asked Garrett Cole to produce any evidence of a capital transfer from my brother to my company in any amount at any time. He referenced the operating agreement. Patricia put the handwriting analysis on the record, side by side with 12 verified signature samples from contracts, tax filings, and state licensing documents going back to the year I incorporated. The forensic examiner's conclusion was clear and technical and left very little room for argument. The signature on my brother's operating agreement was not consistent with my authentic signing pattern. The pressure variation was absent. The characteristic leftward lean in my terminal letter form was absent. The document had been fabricated. Garrett Cole objected twice. Linda Suarez acknowledged both objections and continued. Then Patricia introduced the Raleigh Memorandum. She explained what it was and what it wasn't. She explained that it had been distributed to 6 individuals in a controlled setting on paper only, and that the facility and subcontractor referenced within it did not exist in any operational capacity within my company. She put the emergency motion my brother's attorneys had filed on the record beside it. She read the matching language aloud into the transcript without commentary, because she understood that some evidence makes more impact when you let the silence after it do the explaining. Linda Suarez looked up from her documents. She looked at Garrett Cole. She looked at my brother. Then she looked at me, and she asked the question I had known was coming, but which still landed like a door swinging open. Can you identify for the record the individual within your organization who had access to the memorandum and contacts with the claimant's team? I said yes. I said Marcus's name. I said it clearly. The way you say a thing you've already grieved, not with anger, but with the flat accuracy of fact. Patricia had prepared a supplemental exhibit. Access logs from our project management system cross-referenced with timestamps. Document views, login locations, the specific session during which the Raleigh Memorandum file had been accessed on a device registered to Marcus's company profile less than 18 hours before my brother's attorneys filed their emergency motion. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No one stood up. But the temperature shifted the way rooms shift when the premise that everyone has been arguing around suddenly isn't there anymore. My brother leaned forward and said something quietly to Garrett Cole. Whatever it was. Garrett Cole wrote something on his notepad and underlined it twice. Linda Suarez asked Garrett Cole whether the claimant's team had been in contact with the individual named Marcus prior to the emergency filing. Garrett Cole said he'd need to confer with his client. Linda Suarez said he could have 3 minutes, and then she was going to proceed. What happened in those 3 minutes was visible in the body language, more than anything. My brother's jaw tightened the way jaws tighten when someone is calculating a new story to tell, trying to figure out which version of the truth is still survivable. My father, for the first time that morning, looked at me, not with the posture of authority, not with the patience of a man explaining how the world works to someone who doesn't understand it yet. He looked at me the way people look when they realize they have miscalculated something important, when the evidence they thought would disappear has instead multiplied. My mother was not in the room. She had stayed in the hallway. I thought about her voice on the phone Saturday morning, the care she had put into the architecture of that conversation, and I understood again that the architecture had been deliberate. Distance. Deniability. The same strategy she had always used when the family made decisions she didn't want to visibly make. Garrett Cole told Linda Suarez that his client acknowledged communication with an employee of the respondent's firm but characterized it as informal due diligence. Patricia stood immediately and asked what specific information was sought during this informal due diligence that related to the internal operational memorandum. Garrett Cole began a sentence and did not finish it in a way that made grammatical sense. Linda Suarez made her decision the way people who are very good at their jobs make decisions, without announcement, without performance. She simply stated it. The claim was dismissed for lack of evidentiary support. The forged operating agreement was referred to the State Bar and to Federal Fraud Investigation Review. The conduct of the claimant's team in soliciting confidential internal documents through a company employee was formally noted and referred to the appropriate federal oversight body. She recommended that I consult with my attorney regarding any civil remedies available to me. She closed her folder, and that was it. I sat for a moment after she left the room. Patricia was already organizing her binders, practical and unhurried. Garrett Cole was speaking quietly with my brother in the corner. My father stood apart from them, near the door, and when I passed him on my way out, he said my name once, quietly, in the voice he used when he expected compliance. I kept walking. In the hallway, my mother rose from her chair. She had the look she wore when she was preparing to absorb a situation into the story of herself, to take what had just happened and find the version that made it manageable. She took a step toward me. "We can talk about this," she said, "as a family." I stopped. I looked at her, and I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the dining room in Naperville. I thought about the years of building in silence because I knew what visibility would cost. I thought about the phone call on Saturday and the word misunderstanding and the way she had chosen, in that moment, to stand behind a claim built on a forged version of my name. "I've said everything I have to say," I told her. "Your attorneys can contact Patricia if there's anything further." I walked out of the building into a gray October morning, and the air was cold in the specific way Chicago air gets in fall, sharp, clean, without sentiment. Patricia caught up to me at the bottom of the steps. She adjusted her bag and looked at me the way she looked at situations she had fully processed. "The referrals are real," she said. "This isn't over on their end, legally." "I know," I said. "You should also talk to HR this week," she said. "About Marcus." I nodded. I'd already been thinking about that conversation, which would be its own kind of difficult. Marcus wasn't family. He was an employee who had made a calculation and been wrong about which side of it was safer. I was angry at him the way you're angry at something you partly understand, which is an anger that doesn't clean up neatly. I walked back to my office. It was a Tuesday. There were project coordination calls scheduled for the afternoon. There were deliverable timelines to review, the work that kept things running for clients who depended on continuity, municipal systems, infrastructure schedules, bridges that needed to be assessed and repaired so that people could cross them without thinking about the engineering. All of it was exactly where I had left it, undisrupted, because the thing my brother had tried to destabilize had, in the end, held. I sat at my desk for a while without doing anything. Not from exhaustion, though I was tired. More from the particular stillness that follows something you've been bracing for. The story I had been inside for the past several months. The calls at odd hours, the binder with the color-coded tabs, the trap in the conference room and the waiting, was no longer the story I was in. I was back in the ordinary one, which had its own weight and its own demands, and which was, I found, exactly where I wanted to be. I think about the dining room sometimes. Not with bitterness, exactly, or maybe not only with that. I think about the version of me who printed the business plan on cardstock because he believed the weight of the paper would matter. I don't have contempt for that person. He was wrong about the Rome he was presenting to, but he wasn't wrong about what he was building. There's a thing that happens when your own family treats your ambition like a threat. You start to believe, on some low level that you don't examine too often, that the only way to prove yourself is to them, to earn the specific validation of people who have already decided not to give it. I spent years building quietly, in part because I understood without fully admitting it that I was still waiting for a moment where they would see it and say yes. Yes, this was worth doing. Yes, you were right to try. That moment was never going to come. What came instead was a federal dispute filing and a forged signature, which is its own kind of answer. Brutal and clarifying and, ultimately, enough. The people who kept me standing through the past 6 years were not blood relatives. They were a team in a West Loop office who showed up and did precise work and cared about getting things right. They were a small business banker in Evanston who took a meeting when I had $3,000 and a letter of intent. They were Patricia, who answered before the second ring. They were the city engineer who shook my hand on a project before I had a business card and said, "Call me when you're ready." They were people who didn't need me to be anyone other than the person I was already becoming. I tell you this not because I think my story is unusual. I think it's more common than people say out loud. There are a lot of people building things in silence because they've learned that certain rooms will take your work and call it their own, that certain people will credit your success to luck or inheritance or assistance they never provided. The silence becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a wall, and after a while it's hard to tell whether the wall is protecting you or just isolating you. I don't have a clean lesson. I have a company that is still standing and work that I believe in, and a very good attorney I will probably need again, and a clearer sense than I've ever had of exactly where my family ends and I begin. That's not a comfortable thing to know. But it's a true thing, and in the room I'm trying to build. The one that isn't my father's dining room, isn't a federal hallway, isn't anywhere anyone else gets to name. Truth is the only foundation I'm interested in building on. If you've ever been in a room where someone used the word family to mean control, you already know what I'm talking about. And if you're still in that room, still waiting for the yes that isn't coming, I hope you find your way to the door. That's where the work actually starts. If any part of this stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you're building. I read everyone.